The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
All right, I'm declaring winter over. Yeah, I know it's going to be a little cold next week. 78 today? You kidding? Middle of March? Wow. 20 years ago today, Maryland won the ACC championship. And, you know, it kind of ties in with what we're going to start off with in just a moment here. Sometimes it's an unsung hero who gets the job done. And the name Mike Brennan will live on forever for what he helped Maryland do 20 years ago today as they won the ACC championship over Duke. We'll get to that, all the things that are happening with free agency, the college basketball, the whole deal. We'll roll through that over the next couple of hours right here on ESPN 630. You know, it's funny about the fours. We've been celebrating a lot of these anniversaries recently and talking a lot about the history of Maryland basketball with the death of Lefty Driesell in the last month or so. But it was 74 where you had that classic final against NC State, which Maryland lost in overtime and couldn't go to the NCAA tournament, and that changed things forever as the tournament was expanded the following year, and now it's up to 68 teams. That was the beginning, really, of the modern era of college basketball. And then 1984, when Lefty finally got his ACC title, as they beat Duke with Len Bias as a sophomore, the most valuable player in that tournament. And then it was 20 years ago where Gary Williams, he'd won his championship, and he'd taken Maryland to back-to-back Final Fours. But in 2004, he had his recruiting class off the national championship that was supposed to continue the great success that they had. And at that point, they really hadn't lived up to the hype. You know, getting a class like that off a championship, it was expected because he got a McDonald's All-American. He got a few good players in there, and things weren't exactly going the way that some had hoped. And by winning the ACC championship, it got a lot of people to get off of Gary's back, which was ridiculous 2 years after a championship that they were actually on his back. But he won that, and he said at the time that in many ways it was as satisfying as winning a national championship because he had played at Maryland, and he had played on teams that really had no shot to win the ACC tournament. And they won that in 2004. And unfortunately, haven't won a conference tournament since, but hey, you never know. They're still alive. They have a chance after winning last night against Rutgers, and they play this afternoon against Wisconsin. Look, they got to win 4 games over the next 4 days. Very unlikely, but a very impressive win for them last night. But I'm going to start with this. I talked a little bit about high school basketball yesterday with my alma mater, BCC, the girls team advancing to the state championship game, which will be on Saturday at Xfinity Center. And I may have mentioned the all-Montgomery County regional final to get to the championship game, which was last night between Whitman and Richard Montgomery. It was played at Blair High School, and it was a classic finish. So classic, in fact, that Scott Van Pelt led off his show last night at midnight with what he calls the best thing he saw all day.
We got Maryland 4A boys high school basketball. That's Richard Montgomery at the line. They lead by 2. Walt Whitman, Titian DeRosa, Will Shapiro at the buzzer. Whitman wins it. They were outscored by 16. A 16-0 run for Richard Montgomery. Gave him a 2-point lead. That's Shapiro's only bucket of the night. That 3. And Chris Lund's guys are back in the Xfinity Center in College Park to play for a state title. He is one of the highly respected coaches in Montgomery County hoops. Salute to Richard Montgomery and come up just a bit short, and congrats to Walt Whitman.
All right, SVP for the hometown. He didn't go to Whitman. He went to Sherwood, but he understands Montgomery County pride. And last night, this was a classic finish. Will Shapiro, a sophomore who's known as a lockdown defender, hadn't scored a point all night, but with the clock running out, he had to launch a 3, and it went in. I mean, he had made 7 3-pointers all season. And also, on top of that dramatic end, was what could have been just a devastating loss for Whitman, because they had a 15-point lead in the fourth quarter. There's no shot clock, as you know, in high school basketball. They had a 15-point lead, and then Richard Montgomery went on a 16-0 run. They got a 2-point lead at the end of the game before Will Shapiro knocks down the three. And as Chris Lawn, who's a friend of mine, actually a former intern at the old radio station and has been the head coach at Whitman for 19 years, he won the only state title that they ever got, which was 2006, which was something of a miracle in itself, in that he had a Division I mid-major player on his roster. But they played Roosevelt, which had like 2 or 3 Division I guys, and they pulled off an enormous upset there. And then to win last night when it looked like, they had just completely collapsed down the stretch, and to get a three-pointer like that, he said he thought it might be the biggest shot in Whitman history, and maybe it was, because it puts them back in the championship game, and they're going to play Frederick on Saturday night. But what a great thing, and what a wonderful thing in 2004 that everything is on video, so that Scott Van Pelt, who's local, who hosts a national show on ESPN, can lead off the show last night with Whitman winning on a buzzer beater by Will Shapiro. Mazel tov to Shapiro and his entire family and the entire Whitman team, and best of luck playing in the championship game on Saturday. They used to play both the semifinals and the finals when I was in high school at then Cole Fieldhouse. I guess now it's just the state championship games, and we'll have my alma mater playing, the women, the girls, playing on Saturday, as well as the Whitman boys playing Frederick for the championship. All right, to the college basketball and the not surprising end of the season for Georgetown, as they went 9-23 this year, and went out at least with a fight. I'll give them that. They were outmatched against Providence, a team that Ed Cooley had left to go to Georgetown. They had beaten Georgetown twice during the regular season. And Georgetown was competitive in the second half. They really were. Providence was able to pull away late and win the game by 18 points, 74-56. But Ed Cooley said after the game, I was looking for the audio of it, I couldn't find it, but he said after the game, after they finish up this season, we have to continue to build. We'll get better. It's not the end of the day. The sun will come up tomorrow. We're going to move this program in the right direction. The Big East is going to be healthier when Georgetown gets to where we're going to go. He was expected to take a step up from what had happened under Patrick Ewing, and he really didn't. 9 wins this year, and only 2 of them in the conference. They are 4-55 in conference play over the last 3 years, and both of their conference wins this year were against DePaul, which went 0-20 in the regular season in the Big East. And here's my only question about Cooley, who I love his press conferences, and I love his intensity, and I think that he's going to do a very good job at Georgetown. But here's my hesitation. You hired a guy who's old school. He's not 35. He's in his 50s. He's in mid-50s. And he had great success at Providence in what was really the old world of college sports. He had a program which, in where they were, was really the only program. You're in Providence, you're not in Boston. And he comes to Washington, D.C., where right now, even in college basketball, he's secondary to Maryland. And in terms of the local scene, it's pro town. We got major sports in all 4 of them. And within the last, 6 years, we've seen championships in hockey and in baseball, and of course the NFL controls everything in every city, so most of the attention revolves around the Commanders right now. Can he do this here? I mean, that's a question. I'm rooting for him, and he says all the things that coaches should say, and players should run through a wall for him, but we're in a new world where Nick Saban accurately says the only thing a recruit's interested in is how much money he's going to make. And on top of how much money he's going to make at Georgetown, he's playing for a school that's playing its home games in a 20,000-seat pro arena where even if things are good, it's going to be half filled. So I hope this works out for Ed Cooley, and I hope he builds Georgetown into a top 25 program again. But I don't know if he'll be able to do it, and if he does, how much of the way he's done it to be successful at Providence is he going to have to change in an era where, again, it's all about, how much cash am I going to get? And if I'm not happy with my playing time my first year, I'm going to go someplace else. Now, he's got to bring in a slew of new players next year. His best player is Jaden Epps. He's got 2 more years of eligibility. Hopefully he can hang on to him. He had 30 points last night. He's really been their only consistent scorer throughout the season. But you got to bring in a bunch of guys. And look, John Thompson built the program out of nothing. When he took over at Georgetown in 1972, they were at the level of, maybe like an AU. And then they joined the Big East Conference. Things began to change. And once he got Patrick Ewing, that was a transformational player. I don't know if Cooley's going to be able to do that at Georgetown. If he can, good for him. If he can do that, that would be great. But the talk is great, and I love listening to him. But at some point, you've got to start to deliver. And in a program that was at least supposed to take a pretty big step up, if not, a major step up, they really didn't. 9-23 this year with only 2 wins in the Big East is not good. Not good, and he knows it. And he's got to get some people in here who can play. But the question is, will he be able to do it? Because, a lot of guys, you look at their track record and you say, well, they did it this way in this space. And so when they get to the new space, they're going to be able to do it the same way. I don't know, because he came aboard just as really NIL and the transfer portal is taking hold. It was, the second year of it when he took over last spring. So I wish him luck. I hope it works out. I think things are great in this area when the college basketball is big. Maryland and Georgetown are going to be able to play every year. I think that's going to be really helpful, that they're going to start off with a preseason game probably every December, and they'll likely play it. Even if they play all of them at Capital One Arena, that'll be fine. If it's a home-and-home, that's okay too. But Ed Cooley and Kevin Willard are friends from their days together in the Big East, so they've gotten together and said it's going to happen next year. And again, I hope it does. But a year that was supposed to be better for Georgetown, markedly better, really wasn't. Just 2 Big East wins and a record of 9-23. As for Maryland, they kind of looked in the mirror last night at who they have been, and the team that they have been is called Rutgers. And Rutgers last night was really, really terrible shooting the ball. They shot 31% from the field, 5 for 21 from three-point. That's even worse than Maryland, which is one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the country. In fact, they are going into this game. I don't know if they raised their numbers a bit, but going into the game, they were 343 of 351 teams around the country shooting threes at 28%. They weren't lights out last night. They were 7 of 20, which is 35%, so that's a jump up. But they shot the ball better than Rutgers, who couldn't put it in the ocean last night, and Maryland got off to a big lead. They hit threes early. Like, they hit 7 for the game. I think they hit 3 of them in, the first 2 minutes of the game. They were up at one point, 14-3. I mean, it was really, I think the closest that Rutgers got throughout the night was 9 points, and they were able to pull away and win by 14. And part of the reason was that they had Julian Reese back. Now, I said this yesterday. Reese sat out the Sunday night game, the last regular season game against Penn State, because of a sore ankle. And I was dubious of that. I don't have any inside information. Just seemed to me that, this was setting up for a transfer. But I saw on Twitter half an hour before the game that he was going to be a go, and he was. And he played very well last night. He had 12 points, 6 rebounds, couple of blocks, 3 assists, and as Willard said,
we got back late on Sunday, and I brought him back in. I brought the team back really early the next day. And Jew was a great leader. He showed me that he was all right. Again, I'm always extra cautious, especially as many minutes as he's played. So having him back, just again, he's one of the best centers in the country. So when you have that scoring threat, passing threat, defensively, he helps us and he locks down so many different ways. It was huge.
Yeah, and the defense. I mean, the defense has been there all year. They're not very good record-wise. They're 16-16, but the way they've shot the ball, they're 500 because of that defense. And last night against a Rutgers team who doesn't shoot well anyway, but doesn't shoot this badly. 5 for 21 from 3, 31% for the game.
Rutgers is a lot like us. there's times where they really struggle to shoot the ball, and they run good stuff, but there's times where you just got to pack it in on them at times and just try to make them make threes. And I thought the last 2 times we've played them, our guys have done a really good job of understanding scouting reports and personnel, because it's more of a personnel game, just because they're so good at driving the basketball. Williams is so good at driving the basketball. Just making it hard for them to drive.
Yeah, so that was the difference last night, was either the defense that they played or the Rutgers was just god-awful, because they couldn't hit anything in this game. It was never really a point where you looked at it and you said, okay, maybe Rutgers is going to make a run here, because they didn't show any threat of doing that because they couldn't shoot. Now, I didn't see it because, thank you, Peacock, I listened to it on the radio with Johnny Holiday and Chris Nocky and Walt Williams. They did a fine job, and it was kind of a loose broadcast since the game was never really tight. But now they're in a position, they got to win 4 games in 4 days starting this afternoon against Wisconsin, and they lost to Wisconsin in the one matchup that they had against them this year. Be interesting to see what happens in the offseason. They're definitely losing some players, because of Dante Scott, who's been there for seemingly 20 years. His eligibility is up, and he's going to go. In terms of any kind of a miracle and whether they can get this done in the next 4 days, they had a really tough thing happen late in the game. 50 seconds to go. Jahari Long collapsed on the court, grabbed his right leg. He wasn't really able to put any weight on it, and they don't know about his status for today, but I would say doesn't look good based on what I was able to hear from the broadcast last night and what they're saying so far. And we'll see. Can they get through this game against Wisconsin, who they played close on the road? And even last night with the blowout, Jameer Young didn't play all that well, and if he can put the team on his back, who knows? Maybe they're playing this weekend, but it is a disappointing season, and a season where they are almost certainly not going to be going to postseason play. All right, coming up, we will get to what the Commanders are doing in free agency, as maybe they're not even done. Bobby Wagner kind of came out of nowhere yesterday, didn't he? We'll talk about that. Plus, Kirk Cousins with Scott Van Pelt on his move from Minnesota to Atlanta. Stay with us. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. All right, we got Mike Callow sitting in for Tony at 11 o'clock today. And later this hour, we'll look back 20 years ago today when Maryland won the ACC championship, improbably, because they had to come from 19 points down just to get to the final. They're down 10 late against Duke. Looks like it's over. They take them to overtime. They win the game thanks to some key free throws by a player who spent 4 years at Maryland barely playing. And it's just a great story, and a great story to look back on. And it's the last time that Maryland won a conference championship, but it was a wonderful day. And they didn't have memes in those days, but there was a kid. He looked like he was 4 or 5, so that means he's an adult now, maybe has his own kids. He's on his dad's lap, and he's crying, and he and his dad are both wearing Duke jerseys. Aw, poor Dukies. Didn't get it done that day. John Gilchrist had the greatest week of his life, and then things just were never the same for him again. We'll go back on all of that later this hour, but the Commanders continue to get things done in free agency. This is a surprise, I think, from yesterday, where Bobby Wagner, who I don't think was a player that anybody was talking about, lands in Washington. Now you can say he's 33 years old and you don't know what he's got left, and he's more, maybe just another name being chased, as they did so many times during the days of Dan Snyder. You can look at it that way, but also you can look at it as a way of maybe having somebody who can be a leader on this team. And he is 33 years old, but I mean, last year he was the top tackler in the league. He had 183 total tackles, including 36 on third downs. His 71 run stops ranked him second among linebackers per Pro Football Focus. Also had 3.5 sacks and 17 quarterback pressures. And, a lot of times a new coach will come in, and he wants a guy to set the tone for the organization. And I believe that that he is a guy who has the chance to do that. Now, the story goes from he left Seattle to go play 1 year with the Rams, 2022. Then he comes back to Seattle last year. Yeah, there were still some players left, but you know how the league turns over all the time. He stepped back in, and it had been like he'd been there for 20 years, and he's cursing out his guys. He's calling meetings in the middle of the field in practice because he's not happy with the way things are going. So that's the kind of guy that Dan Quinn probably wants to set the tone. And he's also got Ken Norton Jr. as his coach. Ken Norton Jr. was the defensive coordinator in Seattle where Wagner was. So there could be that there could be a lot of that happens with Wagner, as well as maybe he is a guy who can really be great on the field. I made the comparison in the last hour to Jack Pardee. Jack Pardee was part of George Allen's great defenses in Los Angeles with the Rams. They had great regular seasons. Unfortunately for them, they didn't perform very well in the postseason, and Allen was fired after the 1970 season in Los Angeles, came here in 71, and on draft day traded most of his draft to the Rams for a bunch of his veteran defensive players, like Dyron Talbert, who had a great long run here, like Jack Pardee, Myron Patios. He made another trade to bring in Richie Pettibone, who was very effective as a safety, especially the first year that Allen was here and they made the playoffs. He brought in his old guys, and with no salary cap, he was able to do it. He had to trade for them, but to Allen, draft picks didn't mean anything because it was all about the future is now. That's not the case here. There's a rebuild that's going on, and it's going to take a few years for them to do it. But you've got to have somebody to set the culture for you. And it's more than just the coaches. It's more than just Dan Quinn. It's more than whatever they do with Cliff Kingsbury and the offense. This is about having veteran guys who know your system. They're kind of lieutenants for the general here. And this was John Keim last night on his podcast with the analysis that he has in looking at Bobby Wagner coming here.
The question is, what does he have left? And that's the one thing that I don't know that I can answer. I'm not sure. You talk to people who watched him play out in Seattle, or, certainly were around the team. I think there's a question about that. Is he the same cover guy that he was before? Is he the same, should he be playing every down? And maybe he won't have to. So that's the one thing you wonder what he has left, because just remember, I've always said, you don't chase names, you chase where these guys are at, but it's a 1-year deal. So if whatever he has left, I think in a 1-year deal, he should be okay because of what the value that he also adds. The couple other things he gives you, one, first of all, in Seattle last year, I don't think the plan was to play him as much as they did. I think they needed to. So I think that's something that, to watch how they use him here. And I think but the other part of that is that it gives them some flexibility in what they can play. So in Dallas, they played a 3-4 with Dan Quinn. That's their base. I know that the base is only about 20 to 25% of the time. And then in the nickel, it's something else. But it gives you some flexibility with the base. And Seattle used a base 3-4 last year. So he's played in a 34 front in the base package for a couple years in a row now. And now you have two guys who can play in the middle in a 34 in Wagner and Frankie Louvu, if you want to play it that way, and then use Jamin Davis kind of in a hybrid type role. Or if you go to a 43 base, then you can put Wagner in the middle or Louvu in the middle, whichever one you want to do. But Louvu can play outside and Wagner can play in the middle. He's used to having that green dot on his helmet. So I think it gives you some of that flexibility.
Yeah. So they have, it's not, don't knock your socks off signings here. But it's another indication of just how bereft of talent that Adam Peters saw the roster when he got in here. There was a really telling soundbite from the opening news conference when he was asked about assessing the roster, and there was a long pause. Like you could tell, oh, yeah, I looked. It's not very good. So here's the list of players. Zach Ertz, that was the first of the free agent signings. From Cowboys, they get Dorrance Armstrong and the center Tyler Baez. Frankie Louvu comes over from Carolina. Austin Eckler from the Chargers, and then they get a kicker in Brandon McManus. They get a backup guard, maybe a guy who could start for them, and Nick Allegretti from Kansas City. Cleveland Farrell, defensive end from San Francisco, winning program there. Marcus Mariota, and that complicates the whole quarterback situation, and I guess leaves the future of Sam Howell very much in doubt, but he's here. Dante Fowler, defensive end. They got a long snapper in Tyler Ott. Safety Jeremy Chin they bring in. They re-signed Jeremy Reeves and Wagner. And so, 13 guys coming in from outside the organization. Plus, they also re-signed Jamison Crowder, who's 30 years old, but actually seemed to have something left in the tank as a punt returner last year. He had played very well for Washington, left the team, been, I think, a fourth-round pick out of Duke, and came back. And at 30, he may have something left. And it's not much of a bonus, a guarantee. So if they find a kick returner either in the draft or in free agency, they can make the move from there. So I think that this is a really good few days for the team. You could say, well, how come they had all this money and they didn't go out and spend like crazy? What they did is they looked at the roster and they said, we're upgrading here, and we're upgrading to the point where if we don't see a player at that position who we want to draft, we're going to be okay. We're going to be better off with these guys that we're bringing in rather than the guys who played that position last year, including quarterback. You're probably going to say goodbye to a guy who started 17 games in Sam Howell and at times looked pretty good. But you're also in a new era, a new regime, and you're going to be, the most important thing you're going to be doing is drafting a quarterback. That's number one. Draft the quarterback, get the right guy, develop him, use Mariota as the veteran backup to help bring him along. Hell, if you have to start Mariota the first 5 games of the season, that's fine too. Maybe even the whole season. Doesn't mean that the guy you take is going to be a bust. The most important thing is he develops in his first year, and by the time he gets to year 2 or 3, he starts to make strides towards becoming that franchise quarterback. I know you have to plug a guy in these days when you take him that high, but I think that they may be setting up here that they could get by with Mariota, who at times has played pretty well. He was doing okay in Atlanta, and then started to decline, and they wanted to make a change and go with the younger player, and so then he had knee surgery and he checked out. That was frowned upon by a lot of people, but I think the feeling is he went to Philadelphia last year, was back up there, seems to be committed to the game, understands where he is in his career. Was he 30, 31? So I think they're in pretty good shape there, making that signing. All right, more chatter yesterday, and this was from the Dan Patrick Show. They had on Jerome Bettis, and Jerome Bettis always fun. Used to work for ESPN and is in the Hall of Fame. And kind of out of nowhere, because like Patrick will do this, asked him about his Hall of Fame jacket. Where, he said, is your Hall of Fame jacket?
It's in the closet.
Okay.
It is. Yeah, I keep it in plastic in the closet.
When's the last time you put it on?
Actually, I had to bring it to the Super Bowl. There was an event that they asked for me to wear the gold jacket. So, it's very few times that I wear it. But, when the request comes in, it's one of those you're like, okay. But the problem is, when you're packing, you never pack a jacket, something I'm just going to wear one time, in a week. So you try to get multiple uses out of it. But that's not one of those things you could just show up in a gold jacket and be like, I just threw this thing on. Yeah, not quite. Maybe a little bit of overkill.
Have you ever worn it to go to sleep? You ever worn it in bed?
I have not. But I will say this. When I was first in, when I got it, it had its own seat. Early on, it had its own seat. It kind of did things as its own person.
Wait, where was the seat for your Hall of Fame jacket? Like at the table?
No. So, the funny story, when we flew in to Canton, we flew in private, on a private plane and everything. And so when we came back, it had its own seat, and it kind of sat there, and it was his own. So it kind of was born out of that. So then when we get home It had a seat at the house. When we had dinner at the dinner table, had a seat with us. So it kind of took on a life of its own. It's like, okay, bring the jacket with us. It's like the little dog. Bring Bryce with us. No, bring the jacket with us. So it became part of the family.
Hey, if you get one of those, you protect that jacket. And if it needs its own seat, that's okay. One of the best touchdown celebrations, it may have been in the preseason, may not have been in the regular season, but Chad Ochocinco scored a touchdown and came over to the sidelines where he had left an oversized gold jacket, and he had teammates help him put it on the sidelines. That was funny. Stanley Cup, I think it's his own seat on a plane. Why shouldn't a gold jacket from the Hall of Fame? On to this. Daniel Gafford was a good solid player here for a couple of years. They traded him to Dallas at the trade deadline. No one would ever put the name Daniel Gafford in the same sentence with Wilt Chamberlain. Gafford has 2,621 career points. Wilt Chamberlain had 31,419 points. Daniel Gafford had his best scoring season in his 8-9-year career in the NBA here last season when he averaged 10.9 points a game. Wilt Chamberlain averaged over 50 points a game for a season. He had 100 points in a game. He had 6 70-point games, 32 60-point games, including 4 straight in 1962. However, Daniel Gafford has a chance to break Wilt Chamberlain's record for consecutive field goals made. Wilt made 35 straight back in 1967, and after going 5 for 5 in Dallas's win over Golden State the other night, Gafford now has made 33 straight shots over his last 5 games. And, okay, he's not an outside shooter, but neither was Wilt. This season, Gafford, 366 of his 376 attempts have come from inside the paint, and a lot of those have been dunks, and he is shooting 77%. He has only taken 69 shots the entire season that weren't a layup or a dunk, according to NBA stats. And among all players to attempt at least 2,000 shots, DeAndre Jordan's 67.4 conversion ranks as the best in history. Gafford with 1,527 attempts, so he's almost 500 short of that. Isn't quite there, but he's currently has a career percentage of 70.6, and 17 of his 33 straight baskets have been dunks on this run, including all 5 on Wednesday, and 31 of them have come with at least 1 foot inside the restricted area. So he's not taking any long shots. I wonder what happens if the ball winds up in his hand as the shot clock is running down. Would he just pass it off and take the shot clock violation? I don't know. But it's just, it's just funny to think of Daniel Gafford in the same conversation with Wilt Chamberlain. It's just apples and oranges. And I think back to when I was going to American University. Now, I left in the middle of my sophomore year, so I wasn't there the following season when a player that I had watched on the team, he was a solid backup player, and I guess we were the same age, or he was a year older. So I left before the end of his junior year, I think it was, or maybe sophomore year, whatever. But the following year, 1978, Gary Williams is the coach. Ray Vokel, who probably averaged 5 points for his college career at AU, set the NCAA record by hitting 24 consecutive field goals. 24 consecutive. And it was the same kind of thing. He wasn't that big. He was about 6'5". At that level, that league, 6'5", you could play inside. And he made 24 consecutive baskets. Not that he was, a high-volume shooter, but he made 24 in a row, and that set a record. And then after that, he launched a shot that was like 20 feet or so, and he missed, and he wasn't supposed to take those shots. And Ed Tapscott, who is Gary Williams' assistant, told me that story. And he said they looked at each other like, why the hell is he shooting that? And Gary said to him, well, we owed him that. And I haven't checked the record, but I wonder if that's still an NCAA record. 24 consecutive shots made by Ray Vokel. And Daniel Gafford has a chance to break the NBA record of most consecutive field goals made, Wilt Chamberlain, back in 1967, when I'm sure most of them were on dunks as well. Fun stuff. Coming up, Kirk Cousins talking to Scott Van Pelt about his move from Minnesota to Atlanta and how it may tie in some ways to the move that he made from Washington some years ago. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
I got Mike Callow in for Tony at 11 o'clock today. I'll get to Kirk Cousins and the move that he is making from Minnesota to Atlanta. That's where his wife's from. He's going to have his family there. And God bless Kirk. Always says the right things. He talked to Scott Van Pelt last night about the move. Just want to throw this in. We talk about these coach moves and the buyouts that go along with it. USA Today is doing this big series on what coaches make and the clauses that are in their contracts. The Jimbo Fisher one, remember that from last season when he was bought out by Texas A&M, $75 million to leave. Dabo Swinney, the coach at Clemson, has a $5 million buyout, but if he were to go to Alabama, the cost would be $7.5 million, which if Alabama wanted him would gladly pay. That wasn't a problem. But this is a surprise. Terry Morin is the women's coach at Indiana, women's basketball, and they got a good team there. She's a good coach. She has a clause, though, in her contract that if she resigns April 1st of this year, she would owe just $550,000, even though her contract pays her $1.25 million annually. And she is the 8th highest paid women's coach this season with a contract that runs through 2029. So she's got another 5 years to go. But if she leaves to coach Purdue, she would owe the school $10 million. Yeah, there's the Purdue clause in her contract. That tells you a little bit about the rivalry between the two schools. You know, my son went to Indiana, and he knows about what it means to play Purdue. They play the football game at the end of the year. It's called the Old Oaken Bucket. In many years, neither team is a bowl team, so it's like their Army-Navy game. It's a rivalry in basketball. Indiana was really good for a long time. Now Purdue's really good. Indiana isn't as good. But they are rivals, and such rivals that the former athletic director at Indiana, Fred Glass, who hired her in 2014, she said he put an obnoxious amount of money in my contract for me not to be able to leave for Purdue. I had no idea that kind of stuff could exist. I thought it was funny when he said it, and I saw my contract, and I was like, how's that in writing? Well, it's in writing. So if she leaves for Purdue, she owes Indiana $10 million. I don't think she would be willing to pay that, and even if Purdue wanted her, a $10 million buyout for a women's basketball coach, that would be something. Kirk Cousins making the move, $100 million guaranteed, $180 million contract to leave Minnesota to go to the Atlanta Falcons. He's always smiling. He looks like your high school science teacher who's in shape. You know, he's always wearing clothes that he looks like he bought them at Kohl's. And he just has that scrubbed, all-American, clean-cut look. And so last night he was on with Scott Van Pelt on Van Pelt Show at midnight on ESPN, and they had a nice little chat about his latest move.
Let's start with the most important stuff right out of the gate. Who gets number 8?
I think that's TBD, and it might be bigger than all of us. I think the NFL has to weigh in a little bit, but Kyle told me he's open to switching. I told him I'm open to switching. So we're just trying to be good teammates, and we'll have to see where the dust settles here once the league speaks into it.
There you go. It's funny, the giant wall here in our studio, we got the top 10 chain around your neck. I saw the grill recently that you got. You're heading to the heart of the Dirty South culture. I feel like there's so many collaboration possibilities, Kirk. Have you entertained those yet?
I've only begun to, but you're even giving me, more ideas with the grill and the chains, and we're in Atlanta. I mean, where could this go? We got the Dirty Bird. We got to win football games, and the sky's the limit. So I'll try to do my part winning football games, and then I'll let people a lot more creative than me come up with some really fun stuff.
All right, why don't I get this back to the center here, and we can talk some football. And let's start with the comeback from the injury. You addressed it in the presser, but our audience might not have seen it. Pretty decent timeline for you to be back out there on the field. When will it be?
Yeah, when I first did it, they had told me 9 months, which surgery was November 1st, so that would take me to August 1st. But I'm optimistic that I can get back faster than that. That's kind of the goal I've set for myself. The key is that you don't rush it, that you do what you're told, and we should be just fine when we get around in mid-September for week 1.
Right on. Well, that's always the hardest thing for any athlete, right, is to take your time and not rush back. But you do have some time before the season begins. Right. As for what was appealing about Atlanta, I imagine that it's a long list, and I imagine that there are life considerations beyond just football. We often forget you all are human beings, too. But what drew you to the Atlanta Falcons, Kirk?
The key scout, Mike Shanahan told me a long, long time ago when I was in Washington that the key to winning and ultimately winning a Super Bowl is you got to have the owner, head coach, GM, and quarterback all on the same page. And if there's a breakdown in a link in that chain, it's tough to win a Super Bowl. And so I was looking for a place where I felt that the four of us could really all be able to trust each other to do our individual jobs and that it would take to win a Super Bowl. And as I look at Atlanta, I feel really good about the head coach, owner, general manager, and quarterback being on the same page. And that's really where it starts and ends. And from there, you look at a talented roster, you look at a great city to play for, you look at the fact that my wife is from Atlanta, and things just really aligned, and we're thrilled to be here.
I'm looking at the timeline, right, Kirk, for the way it went. You were here in Washington, then you go to Minnesota, and there's some thought in life about everybody kind of reinventing themselves every certain number of years. But I mean, it's just kind of the way it went for you. And I know, in talking to your head coach, former head coach in Minnesota, the kind of bond you had. A new beginning means something ends. How difficult is it, Kirk, to leave behind what you had in Minnesota with coach and with players there?
Yes, I mean, let's be honest. It was a bittersweet day for us here, knowing that saying hello to Atlanta and being a part of so much that's exciting here also meant saying goodbye in Minnesota. And goodbye to 6 years, a lot of positive relationships I'll have for the rest of my life. Can't say enough good things about Kevin O'Connell and the difference he's made for me on and off the field. And, it is a difficult reality of this business. And so, we have a lot to look forward to here, but certainly was tough to say goodbye to Minnesota.
Speaking of the business of it, I mean, you've come out on the right end of it from the contract standpoint, and the money's the money. But I feel like, and I've said this on the show, I feel like you're still underappreciated by money in terms of what you bring to a team. But ultimately, there's got to be some pressure, Kirk, internally, and some urgency, I would think, to win. I mean, because you only get so much runway. How does it change, considering that this could be like the last chapter for you in Atlanta, however long it is? How do you even quantify that?
Oh, certainly. When I signed this contract, my goal is to retire a Falcon. I want to be here for the rest of my career and play in such a way that I would earn the right to do that. And, I hope I have several more years, but I have no intention of needing to leave Atlanta. So we need to win to do that. And I know that if we do win, they would have no intention of needing to move on from me. So I think there's a sense of urgency. I think, having been through this league now 12 years and seen so much and had the heartbreaking losses and had the seasons where you thought you had a chance and it didn't go as far as you wanted it to, I think now at year 13, you have a little more informed perspective.
There you go.
To be able to say, hey, we got to have a sense of urgency. And what does that look like? It's one thing to talk about winning world championships, but what does the standard actually look like on a Wednesday during OTAs? And trying to hold people to that standard, hold yourself to that standard. That's really what it's about. And I'm excited, to be able to do that alongside a lot of other great people in this Falcons building, and can't wait to get to work.
That's Kirk Cousins. We'll see if he can work out number 8 with Kyle Pitts, who's an outstanding tight end for them. Pitts was asked about it yesterday, day before. And he said, I'll give it up just as long as he throws me the ball. Well, he's going to throw him the ball because Pitts is a really talented player. And I think he'll wind up wearing number 8. It's probably good for the league. It's good for marketing, things like that, familiar look and all that. The most important thing I think he said there, most important or most interesting to me, was what Mike Shanahan said to him, that in order to win a Super Bowl, the coach, the general manager, and the owner and the quarterback have to all be on the same page. And if you look at the disintegration of that great season of 2012, where Robert Griffin III was amazing with 20 touchdown passes, only 5 interceptions, 850 yards rushing. It's one of the great seasons ever put together and the greatest rookie quarterback season ever. Kirk was kind of the divider of all of that, not in his fault in any way, But just the way things worked out, including being drafted in the 4th round when they took Griffin, and because of the personality and the insecurity of Griffin, that was a problem right away. Then Griffin and his dad decided that Mike Shanahan wanted to sabotage Griffin's career and play Kirk Cousins. That goes back to when RG3 hurt his knee against the Ravens, and then the following week they played at Cleveland, and they won with Kirk not running the pistol offense, and they thought, oh, Shanahan's trying to get us killed so we can play Kirk and all that. And then ultimately, when things collapsed in the 2013 season, when they won only 3 games, and with 3 games to go, Shanahan knew he was on his way out the door. He knew Snyder was going to fire him and wanted to deliver one last middle finger to him and said, okay, we're gonna rest up Robert. We're going to make sure he's healthy for the offseason, and we're going to play Kirk. And they were competitive in 2 of the 3 games. They had a chance to beat Dallas and might have been Atlanta. They had a chance to win 2 of those 3 games. Last game of the year was just a disastrous mess against the Giants. And had Mike come back the following year, I don't know what would have happened, because I think at that point he was through with RG3. And talk about being on the same page, the owner was not on the same page with the coach that he hired. And as far as being the GM, that's hard to say if Mike really was. I mean, Bruce Allen sort of was the GM. That was a little bit fuzzy. The structure here is much better now. We have a clear-cut GM in Adam Peters. We have a clear-cut coach in Dan Quinn. We have an owner who's owned other professional teams, seems to be handling everything very well right now. And the quarterback remains the question. Who's it going to be? Who are they going to draft? Are they going to stay at number 2 and take what appears to be Jaden Daniels as the choice there, or could they move up or down? We don't know. But it just to hear Mike Shanahan outline it that way, that all 4 have to be on the same page, they weren't on the same page. After year 1, the quarterback was not on the same page as the coaching staff. The owner was not on the same page as the coach, and the general manager, whoever he was, whether it was Shanahan or Bruce Allen, that was kind of fuzzy in the picture as well. And if you look at teams that are successful, that's what it is. And that's what it is in Kansas City. That's what it is in San Francisco. That's what it has been for decades in Baltimore. That's the way it works. And to have heard Shanahan outline it that way really tells you an understanding. And, Mike won 2 Super Bowls in Denver. I think he should get consideration for Hall of Fame. And as we drop further and further back from the steaming disaster that Dan Snyder left behind, I think you have to look at what happened here and say, even with that, Shanahan put together a team that was very exciting and could have, if RG3, hadn't gotten hurt or, had things been handled differently, I think they could have won that game with Cousins. They might have even won a playoff game and been on their way. But it is what it is. It's a new era and things move on. I saw this yesterday and had to laugh. The Eagles have denied impermissible contact between general manager Howie Roseman and running back Saquon Barkley during the negotiating window before the start of free agency. As you know, Saquon Barkley left the Giants, signed with the Eagles, 3 years, $37.7 million, $26 million fully guaranteed. But his former coach at Penn State, James Franklin, suggested that Roseman spoke to Barkley during the, quote, legal tampering period. Franklin saying, for him now to come back and be able to play within the state in Philadelphia, he said, is one of the first things that Howie said to me on the phone as part of his sales pitch to him was not only the Philadelphia Eagles, but also obviously the connection with Penn State and the fan base as well. So that's an indication from James Franklin that there was discussion before. Does anybody really believe that free agency, the legal tampering period opens at noon on Monday, and we find out like by 1 o'clock about these huge signings? Come on, this is a farce. Teams are not allowed to talk directly to players during the negotiating window unless the player represents himself. And the Eagles said that all recruiting done by the team is facilitated through an agent. I mean, look, Dan Snyder was seen at the Combine in 2009. It must have been 2009. Having dinner at St. Elmo's Steakhouse, which is the number one place in town. That's where everybody goes to be seen. He's having dinner with the agent for Albert Hainsworth. The Combine is a week and a half, 2 weeks before the start of free agency. Give me a break. The NFL declined comment on whether it is investigating possible impermissible contact. An Eagles spokesman said he was unaware of any communication from the league to the team on that. Come on. I mean, do you really believe that the first time they talked was at noon on Monday? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Remember the days of players swapping teams when both the Cowboys and the 49ers were good? Like Ken Norton Jr., who's now on the coaching staff here, he played in like 5 consecutive Super Bowls, I want to say, or 4. I think he won 2 of them one of them was San Francisco, and he won 2 of them, or 3, maybe even 3 of them with the Cowboys. That's the way it worked. Deion Sanders jumping back and forth. So we get this. Linebacker Eric Kendricks earlier on Wednesday agreed to a 1-year deal with the 49ers, but instead decided to join the Cowboys. Now, the Cowboys defensive coordinator is Mike Zimmer, who coached Kendricks with the Vikings from 2015 to 21, and he wants him there as, I guess in many ways, like Wagner's coming here to help out with the new coaching staff. A team captain who finished second on the Chargers with 117 tackles last season, Kendricks was released by Los Angeles in a salary cap move. They saved $6.5 million with his release. So, I just find it funny, and I think your better chance to win is with San Francisco, but, maybe he feels like there's more potential playing for his old coach. Maybe there's a comfort level, whatever. But I just thought of the days where guys used to jump back and forth between San Francisco and Dallas and win Super Bowls with both teams, as Deion did. He won with San Francisco in 1994, the 94 season, and then jumps to Dallas and wins another one the following year. And Deion always knows how to play the angles. I got to say that. Whether you like him or not, he knows how to play the game. Coming up, 20 years ago today, Maryland's win over Duke in the ACC championship game. One for the ages. It's the Andy Poland Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Poland Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Maybe it's the long beard that Morgan Moses has and was so distinctive. And he was an offensive lineman, but he was a really good talker, good with the media, and just seemed to be like a guy who was here like yesterday. I know he was in Baltimore last year. Actually, he was there the last 2 years. This time just flies by. The last time he played in Washington was 2020. Went to the Jets in 2021. Goes to Baltimore for 2 years. 2 years. And now he's going back to the Jets as they sent him back in a trade. And the Jets get the Ravens' 4th-round pick, and New York will send its 4th-rounder and a 6th-rounder to Baltimore. So I guess his value is diminishing. He was a starter on a team that had a chance to win the Super Bowl. He's 33 years old and played at Virginia and probably has a future in the media because he's really good in the press conferences and things like that. But, I didn't realize the last time he played here was 2020. That's the last time around. I guess he was here for Ron Rivera's first year and has been gone for 3 years, 2 different teams, and now going back to another team. Time moves along. And it moves along in looking back 20 years, because this does seem relatively recently, but it was 20 full years ago that Maryland won the ACC championship, beating Duke in just a spectacular game. And I remember this season. This was 2 years after they won the national title, which was the 2001-2002 season. The following year, after they lost, some of their top players like Juan Dixon, they got back and had a chance to go pretty far. They really had, I think it was Michigan State that they played, and they had a really bad game, but they had a chance to win. Steve Blake missed a shot at the buzzer that could have either sent it to overtime or sent them to the Sweet 16. But that ended that run, and that group, looked back and said, we were the winningest group of seniors in the history of the school. It was incredible. 2 Final Fours, a national championship, and a run to the second round of the NCAA tournament. Also, it included players that Gary had recruited off the national championship and guys who he thought could keep the program at the top level for years. And it was, somewhat disappointing, though they were still very competitive. And I remember going to the last game of the 2003-2004 season. They played Virginia, the usual rivalry game. It was a very close game, and Maryland won. And Gary Williams, at the end of that game, when they hit the shot that clinched it, jumped like he was, like still playing. Gary's in his late 50s then. He almost jumped out of his suit. That's how excited he was. I'd never seen him, even when they were on their way to winning the national championship. He was low key. He was very intense on the sideline, but in terms of celebration, he didn't really do that. Like when they won the championship, he cut down the net and he gave it a little twirl over his head, but he was, more focused on the players getting the attention. And so the excitement that he showed was remarkable, and he showed that excitement because he figured that had clinched an NCAA tournament spot for Maryland in a season where it looked kind of shaky because they had lost that veteran leadership that they had from guys like Steve Blake, who had been their point guard for 4 years. And so he thought he was in. So they go to the ACC tournament that year. They're a 6 seed. And Billy Packer is doing that. Packer, remember, he used to do CBS games, but he also did games for, what was it, Jefferson Pilot or whatever the syndicator was of the ACC games. And so Packer's on, and he's saying, Maryland's got a lot of work to do. They're not necessarily in. And Gary was really steamed about that. Like, what are you talking about? We had a great run at the end of the year. We beat Virginia. We had the top 10 strength of schedule in the country. We played a tough schedule in a tough league. We have the record to get in. And Packer goes, no. Well, it didn't matter because on their way to the final, Maryland beats Wake Forest and they beat NC State, 3 nationally ranked teams, and then they go on to play Duke for the championship. Now, Duke had owned the ACC tournament. I mean, they were regulars, and Maryland had won in 1958, when the program was really like in the Stone Age, and they won in 1984 when Len Bias was the MVP. Len Bias as a sophomore, that was the one ACC title that Lefty Driesell had won, having had the crushing disappointment 10 years earlier when they played NC State, and those were 2 of the top 5 teams in the country. Maryland lost in overtime, couldn't go to the NCAA tournament. So he got his one in 1984. Now he got to wait 20 years, and Maryland is playing Duke. And at that point, because of the way things had evolved with the NCAA tournament, it was 64 teams then. Maryland was going to be in whether they beat Duke or not. But Gary, being a longtime ACC guy, having been a player there and coaching in the league many years, he wanted to win this. And they had come back from, in the previous game in the semifinals, from a 20-point deficit. So they worked their ass off to get to that final, and they're in. And not surprisingly, Duke is being Duke, and Maryland is down by 12 in the second half and down by 10 with 3 minutes left. But they wind up sending it to overtime. And in overtime, they run out of players essentially because of fouls. They're down players. And so Gary is forced to insert a guard who hardly played. Of the recruiting class that he got off the championship, Mike Grinnan was the least of the recruits. I'm not saying as a person, but as a player. And he really was on the bench for most of his 4 years at Maryland. He was a tough practice player, liked being on the team, had a good attitude, and stayed for 4 years. But in this case, they needed him. They put him in the game. Maryland's got a 3-point lead with less than a minute left, and Grinnan gets fouled, and he's at the line to shoot 1 and 1. If he misses that with a minute left, Duke's going to come down and hit a 3, and then they're gonna take this game maybe into a second overtime, or they're going to win the game in that overtime. Grinnan goes to the line, knocks down both of them. That was his one shining moment as a 4-year player at Maryland, and the Terps hang on to win. This is Dick Vitale with Mike Patrick calling the end of that great moment for Maryland basketball on this day in 2004.
Let the celebration begin in a sea of red. Gary Williams and Mike Krzyzewski, longtime combatants, and what a celebration for the Maryland Terrapins. Maryland outscored Duke 18-10 in overtime. Smith had 25. Gilchrist had 26. Gilchrist was brilliant, Dick, for the entire weekend. He was the entire weekend.
He was the PTP, the primetime performer, the MVP. Absolutely played brilliantly. He was the extension of Gary Williams on that court with an unbelievable, tenacious mental attitude.
Let's go to Mark Jones. He has Gary Williams.
All right, guys. Gary Williams congratulating the Duke players. Coach, how did your team possibly summon up the energy that you displayed in this 3-game run?
We can always play today on adrenaline. I've always felt that. You can play one game, it doesn't matter. And that's what we did today. We were tired, but I think Duke had the pressure on them because they had the streak going of 5 consecutive championships, which I don't think you'll ever see again in this league.
John Gilchrist tied it up with a 3-point play at 77 all. Was that the play of the game in your mind?
Well, that's what we had to do. What we were trying to do there is just good too. But John was good enough to get some contact, and so we were able to tie it up there. We still had time to try to steal the inbounds pass or foul, so we were just going for 2, but John made a great play to get a 3-point play.
Great contribution from your bench. Jones, Grinnan.
Grinnan, he's the guy, man. He's played hard every day in practice. It doesn't usually work out that way. It was great.
Last of all, did you ever consider doing situational subbing for Jamar when he was struggling at the free throw line?
He's been shooting well the last 2 weeks, so he's our senior. He's got to make them.
Youth was served, Coach. Congratulations.
Thank you.
20 years since they last won it, guys. Right here. Back to you.
Mark, Maryland beat the number 3, then the number 2, then the number 1 seed.
Yes, indeed, as they knocked down Wake Forest, NC State, and Duke to win the title, with Grinnan hitting the 1-and-1. And as he later recalled, as he was going to the line, Chris Duhon, guard for Duke, says to him, "Good luck, kid. You never play. No way you're hitting these shots." And he knocked them both down, which was great. And John Gilchrist, in the week of his life, he was just tremendous in the 3 games. He had 30 points against NC State, 26 against Duke, and in the 3 games averaged 24. And in the NCAA tournament, I believe they went out in the second round. I think that's the year they lost to Syracuse. And so that was the end of that run that year. But winning the ACC championship was huge. And Gilchrist, unfortunately, he had the attitude the following year that everything was going to revolve around him. He thought he was going to be Steve Francis the next year for Maryland, and he had a really rocky season. They did not make the NCAA tournament. They made a nice run in the NIT, but he didn't even play. They said that he had some type of an injury, but Gary was basically through with him. And he left. He did. I guess he tried to get to the NBA. I don't know whether he played overseas or not. But for 1 week, there was nobody better than Chris Gilchrist in leading that team to the ACC championship, as they did in winning and going on to go to the NCAA tournament when Billy Packer said they had work to do. Well, the work that they did was getting an automatic bid, winning the title, and it's the last one that they won. They went, I guess, so 2004 was like 9 years later, they went to the Big Ten, and have not been to a Big Ten final since. All right, we didn't break much of a sweat today, did we? Nah, we didn't. We'll do that tomorrow. Tomorrow's Friday. Mike Callow is coming in next for Tony, and I will be back here tomorrow morning, coming up at 9 a.m.